I was just 14 years old, and it seemed like an ordinary night. It was roughly around 9 p.m. I was at my younger cousin's house, and I was babysitting for the night. Both of our parents had gone out for drinks and weren't going to be back until late. We were just lounging around, sitting in the living room, watching random shows on television. So we're sitting there, and I was feeling really unsettled. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to ignore it and kept watching TV with my cousin, who was happily enjoying my company. The feeling wasn't going away. So I got up and walked to the back door to lock it. When I came back through the kitchen, I realized what was causing my weird feeling. In the window, there was a very decrepit and homeless-looking man, just staring into the window, looking at my young cousin. Protective mode turned on. I pretended like I didn't see the guy, and I told my little cousin that we needed to go upstairs because our parents would be home soon and they wouldn't want him to be staying up late. I went upstairs and put him to bed, knowing damn well that there was a man outside that wanted to get in. At the time, I was about 125 pounds and 5'8", and I played football for my school. If I remember correctly, I went downstairs and straight into the kitchen and grabbed one of those meat tenderizing hammers. I turned back to the window where I saw him before. He wasn't there. So I ran back to the front door and checked that it was locked. Both the deadbolt and the knob were locked. I ran back upstairs with my meat tenderizer and went into my cousin's room and sat down in front of the door. He asked me what I was doing, and I said that he didn't need to worry about it and that he should keep his head low. I called the cops and then my dad and uncle. Cops said they would take half an hour, and my dad and uncle were 45 minutes away. All of a sudden I hear a window shatter and the sound of heavy boots walking around on the tiles. I told my cousin to stay calm and hide under the covers. I whispered to him that he needed to stay silent. I could hear the guy walking around downstairs. It was horrifying. I gripped that damn meat tenderizer and waited. About 5 minutes pass, and then I hear the boots walking upstairs. At this point, I was having a freaking heart attack. My cousin's door is no more than 10 feet from the stairs. I heard him opening the doors to my uncle's room, then the bathroom. My cousin's door was next along the hallway. I was shaking with adrenaline at this point. Suddenly, he decided to walk back downstairs, and I heard him open the door to the basement. 15 minutes later, the police showed up and burst into the house. They came up to our room, and I told them that I heard him go into the basement. They rushed down there and caught the guy without much fuss. It turned out the guy was loose from a mental hospital from the city about 20 miles away. He had the mental age of a child and had broken into a few other houses in the area. I had nightmares for months afterwards. About 10 years ago, I lived on my own and didn't have much company. I was quite depressed at the time after losing my girlfriend to a drunk driver. I was enjoying a beer and watching the sunset on the back porch when I saw a large, scruffy man emerging from the tree line. My heart skipped a beat as he stumbled towards my house in a menacing way. Living alone, I often used my backyard for target practice. And at that moment, I was immensely grateful for it. Instinctively, I rushed to bolt all the doors while frantically dialing the police. What I didn't know was that this intruder had broken in the day before through a basement window and had spent the night squatting there. He had left the basement door unlocked, and at this point, he made his way inside the house and was making his way up the stairs towards me. I gripped my rifle, aiming at the approaching man as he descended the hallway. I shouted at him, ordering him to stop and get on the ground, but he just kept walking towards me. I fired the first round, loaded with rock salt, but he showed no reaction, undeterred. I quickly followed with a rubber bullet to the chest. Yet the drugged-up guy, who was clearly out of his mind, continued advancing. This guy was huge, at least twice my size, and I realized that whatever drugs he had in his body were going to push him through any pain that a rubber bullet would inflict. He was backing me into a corner. I desperately begged him to stop and warned him what would happen, but he just moaned at me like a zombie and lunged towards me. I took my third shot. I can't recall whether it was buckshot or a slug, but it left a gaping hole in his chest. It barely even slowed him down. He kept coming, and in a frenzied struggle, he wrestled me to the ground. He was moaning and coughing up blood. Suddenly, he grabbed my face with both of his massive hands and started squeezing my head. It was utterly terrifying. I could feel him trying to burst my skull open like a balloon. I don't know how long it actually lasted, but it felt like forever. Eventually, the injury finally caught up with him, and he died on top of me. I was laying with him crushing me for a few minutes. My energy was completely drained, and I could barely breathe with his weight on top of me. His body was pushing my rifle into my chest, and it was causing me serious pain when I tilted his body to the side. I was completely drenched in his blood, and I can still remember the overwhelming smell. I'd completely forgotten that I was still on the phone with the operator, who had heard our entire exchange, which more or less amounted to me pleading, "Stop, or I'll shoot," and the man menacingly taunting. The police arrived soon after, and the incident made it to the local papers. There was a criminal investigation, but eventually, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. It turned out that the intruder was wanted for murder of an elderly couple in Baltimore and had somehow made his way 50 miles up the road into a rural area. I was 18 and chilling in my friend's apartment alone. We lived in a duplex. He was on the top floor and I was on the bottom. Ironically, I was watching a horror movie when I hear something huge come through the front door and into the kitchen. I got up to see who was there. We threw huge parties all the time, so it wasn't really that odd for some random to just show up. But then I saw this dude. He was a huge country boy wearing overalls and holding a huge butcher's knife, just looking at me while standing in the kitchen. I might have said something, I don't remember. But I promptly rushed out of a side door, ran into my apartment and locked all the doors. I don't remember who I called or exactly what happened, but I know I waited until I couldn't hear anyone moving around upstairs anymore and crept back in. Big guy was passed out on the couch. Turns out he was on parole for domestic abuse charges, had gotten super sauced downtown, and made it to the apartment where he used to live. He was arrested and we never heard from him again, so I assume his parole didn't go too well. I also have another story from that apartment, possibly related. Again, I was home alone and waiting for my friend to get back so we could play some Xbox. It's like 1 a.m. and suddenly there's aggressive banging on the door. As I mentioned, it wasn't unusual to have unexpected guests, but banging like this? Not normal. I get closer to the door and this guy is screaming about money, and he kept referring to someone called Big Man. Open the door, Big Man. Big Man apparently owed him $10,000 and he was here to collect. He had something metal, I assumed it was a gun, or a metal baseball bat. I could hear the clang noise when he'd smacked the door. I was pretty high at the time and didn't know what to do, so I just stood on the other side of the door for about 20 minutes whilst he shouted abuse and tried to kick the door down. Pretty dumb, but I was young and stupid. He did eventually leave and I don't know if he came back one night during a party or what, but I never heard about him again. One final thing that happened in that apartment. It was the day after a party, my flatmate was once again out and it was just me at home. There was a knock at the door and I looked through and could see a delivery guy. I opened the door and he says he's got a delivery for me, already paid for. He's just carrying a delivery bag that seems suspiciously light. He asks where's Jason and I ask who that is. He tells me Jason ordered it and says he can only deliver to Jason because he paid for it. I didn't know anyone with that name and the guy didn't look like your typical delivery guy. I told him he must have the wrong address and this guy shoves his hand in the door and pushes it open whilst I'm trying to close it. We have this intense standoff where I'm trying to tell him that Jason doesn't live here and he insists that I let him in to check. He gives me this serious stare and tells me it's just Jason he needs to see. He decided to drop the delivery man act and it was clear that he and Jason had business. I was about to let him in to prove that Jason didn't live here when my flatmate came home and celebrated the fact that I'd ordered pizza. The guy dropped his bag and left. It took me a while to put all of the strange encounters together. The guy on parole who'd broken in originally was probably the guy that owed people money and had people showing up to get him to pay. We both moved out a few weeks later. That place was too much trouble.